a fast one on me. They didn't bother to tell me. I knew about the earthquake. I'm sorry. I knew about the tornadoes. I knew about the the tornado alley, the hail damage we were going to probably get. I knew about the tumbleweeds, but they didn't bother to tell me about the earthquakes. The upside of this is it actually resulted in some good work for our company, and moving to Oklahoma turns out was a pretty good idea, and we're really glad to be there as a family. I got to work with Walt Peters and the ODOT team on this project. I'll have to leave it in this view, I guess. It doesn't want to pop up in full screen view. But anyway, this program was really exciting. Once in a while you get an opportunity to work on something that's really cool, kind of unique and innovative. And this was one of those opportunities that we had. When you put together a project team, and this is one of the things that I'm really passionate about, is putting teams together and then leading them to do really cool stuff. And the way that I accomplish this is by surrounding myself with people that are really smart, with the hopes that they'll make me look smart. And sometimes they'll actually do that. So I did the same thing here. I put together a really exceptional team, bringing together some brilliant professors from the University of Oklahoma, some geotechnical engineers with California geotechnical licenses, as well as a structural engineer with a lot of seismic experience. We also had a lot of other stakeholders on our team, including the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Geological Survey. So with this team, and Walt's going to demonstrate later just the size of the team and how many folks were actually involved in this process. So you may or may not be aware of this, but some media outlets have actually called Oklahoma the new earthquake capital of the world, and that's just because of the large number of earthquakes we've seen in recent times. In this graph here, the three bars on the right represent 2014, 2015, and 2016. Everything else to the left of that dates back to 1978, and there was a number of years we only had one or two 3.0 or greater events in the state of Oklahoma per year. We had as many as almost 900 in 2015 alone, and multiple, I think 40 plus that were greater than a 4.0 magnitude. And over the last 6 years, we've had two that actually surpassed a 5.0 magnitude, being a 5.6 and a 5.8 that we'll talk about here shortly. Here you can see it represented geographically. You can see most of the activity is centered in north central Oklahoma. The red dots represent everything 2014 through 2016, and everything else with a different color is everything prior to that. Of course, there's been a lot of discussion about the uptick in the activity. That was not the focus of our activities. However, I think the science has become fairly clear on that. It has a little something to do with maybe injecting wastewater into the ground. I'm not going to speak specifically about that from fracking. So the 5.8 event that we had, which is the largest one in history of Oklahoma in 2016, the good news is this is the biggest event we've had, and we only had really superficial damage, cosmetic type damage, and some fresh spalling due to perhaps slapping of the superstructure with the abutment, a little bit of movement of some wing walls. But aside from that, we really didn't find any significant damage. A team came up from the University of Texas and did some research of their own. They looked at not only bridges, but they went around and looked at areas that may have been impacted by liquefaction. And they also looked at building structures, and they did find some damage, which is nicely detailed in their report. Very little bridge damage, and they did find one area, or at least one area, that had a little bit of liquefaction in the form of a sand boil that you see here. More recently, we've had a slowdown this year in the earthquake activity. However, Walt pulled up this information last week. The week ending November 3rd, which was Friday, we actually had about 22 events greater than 2.5, with the largest one being a 4.1. You may not think a 4.1 is very significant until it hits very close to your house. And we had a 4.4 hit within a mile of my home. I pulled it up on my little app, and I'm looking, I'm like, I was talking to my wife, I said, holy cow, this thing was literally underneath our house. She said, no, honey, that pin is for the house. The other pin over here, that's for the earthquake location. But it was still within a mile of our home, and it really shook. 4.4, you'd think, that's nothing, right? Well, it'll really shake your home. Some of you may have experienced that. So we pulled together for this program a lot of great resources. We borrowed from everybody and their brother, including Missouri DOT, Kentucky, New York, a lot of agencies. We got a lot of good information that we included in our response plan. So here's the tasks that we were given by ODOT, and there were phase one, we had 7 tasks, which I'm going to cover here by the numbers with Walt. And then phase 2, we're only going to talk about the first task, which is the development of shake casts, because at the end of the day, that's kind of what the goal of the program was to get to that.
Okay, our earthquakes are typically shallow, typically 5 kilometers. They're very frequent, and we get a lot of activity. We want to ensure the safety of the bridges. So as a DOT, every time we get this magnitude 3, we're out there inspecting the bridges. Obviously, after a while, this starts to fatigue our employees, and they got lots of potholes to fix and lots of things going on. Don't need to get out in the middle of the night and start inspecting bridges when we're not finding damage. So we had to do something to kind of back off on this protocol we had. So our Assistant Director of Operations, he wrote a memo in January of 15, and he said, we're going to, instead of inspect at magnitude 3, we're going to go up to 4. So 4 to 4.9, 5 miles, 25 miles for 5 to 5.5, and 5.6 and above, 50 miles. How we started out. Okay. So our team, infrastructure here, Gregg and his people, they needed to come up with a protocol that was really a little more scientifically based, something that we could kind of hang our hats on, that we'd be comfortable with and ensure the safety of the bridges. So we start looking at fragility curves of bridges, and we start looking at the acceleration. You know, we got capacity and we got demand. And as these kind of waves move out from an epicenter of an earthquake, at what point do we start seeing damage? With that 1 second period on this acceleration curve on the right, that's the demand. That's where we're looking to. We want to start inspecting at slight damage. That's the green one on the left, bottom left. Then there's moderate damage. Maybe a plastic hinge is starting to form. Major damage, complete plastic hinge. And then complete failure. Your concrete column's not holding the concrete anymore. The aggregates is going all over the place. Got the professors at OU, the real brains of this operation, and they came up with what we call a trigger value. That acceleration where we needed to inspect that spectral acceleration around 5.6%. Okay, so, and we had these fragility curves that took into the year built, like older bridges, older materials, less strength, number of spans, skew angle, main span material, total bridge length. So we kind of had all this built into our computer, and we had our trigger value. On top of that, Oklahoma had other concerns. You know, maybe the fracture critical bridges, the variable skew bridges do even worse. So maybe we just kind of want to put these in a little higher category, start inspecting them sooner. Eventually built this into our program. So here we see a shake cast map. And the map shows the epicenter kind of in the middle of the picture there, little red dot. And it shows, it's very hard to see, accelerations. And the accelerations are typically higher near the epicenter, and as you go out, they get smaller. And it's not necessarily going to be a nice circle radius. It's going to be more pointed. So with that in mind, we kind of need computer models that describe, you know, from your epicenter, how far out do these waves go? As they get further from the epicenter, they get weaker. So we don't, in Oklahoma, have a lot of seismic stations. We don't really experience this until 2009, so we maybe borrow from some other source, and we adopted this Campbell 2003, which tended to overestimate our acceleration, so we put in a little bias factor, and we get where we need to be with 1 standard deviation. So in this, you see a little green line, and that corresponds to that 5.6 spectral acceleration. And then you see magnitudes from 4 to 6. And it just so happens that you interpolate between those lines, and at about a magnitude 4.7, we need to start inspecting out 5 miles. Well, that's what the OU professor said. Our senior management had a slightly different idea. They said, you don't have that many seismic stations. Maybe you just need to be a little bit more conservative. So we maybe couldn't precisely say where that epicenter was. So on the low end, we went down to 4.4 to 4.7 and 5 miles, and 4.8 to 5.3, 15 miles, etc. Okay, and that's what our local governments are going to use to this day. But we're going to go, as you'll see Gregg start explaining things, we're going to move towards shakecast.
So during phase 1, we also analyzed shakecast. We wanted to make sure that it was actually worth pursuing. And so we did that, and it turns out I was probably the biggest naysayer. I really didn't feel like it was going to be worthwhile, but they convinced me over time, and I probably became the biggest proponent of it. One of the biggest tasks we took on early was producing a very user-friendly post-earthquake bridge inspection manual. We wanted to get this into the hands of the field personnel even before we had a full response plan developed, recognizing these guys are already out there. Their earthquakes are happening as we speak. We need to give them a tool. So we put together this manual, which is available. You can download it. It's a great, I think, a very well put together document, heavy in pictures and graphics, very light on text. Pictures, as you know, are very useful. But one of the things that we really focused on was we wanted to make this manual user-friendly for not only experienced inspectors, but we wanted to be able to hand it literally over to a firefighter if we had to and say, hey, study this. You may get called on to go do post-earthquake bridge inspections. So we made it that, we kind of wrote it to both audiences, if you will. So the manual, again, very picture heavy. I'm going to show you some of those here in a minute. But we really wanted to show folks what are we looking for during a post-earthquake bridge inspection versus what we traditionally look for during a routine safety inspection. And sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference in the damage, the types of damage that we find. So one of the tools we wanted to give them was a one-page, what we call a stage 1 inspection form. We have stage 1 and stage 2 inspections, stage 1 being the initial response, ground level assessment, very quick, quick's maybe not the right word, efficient, to go out there and just look for obvious signs of damage. Stage 2 gets called for, that's a more experienced inspection team, certified bridge inspectors. They're called on if the stage 1 team feels it's necessary or appropriate. They go out and they've got a 2-page inspection form to complete. But both of these are very quick, very efficient. We wanted to give them tools that they didn't have to spend a lot of time on paperwork where they could actually focus their efforts on the bridge. So just some examples here of things that are in the manual as far as types of damage. The good news is, like I said before, Oklahoma has had very little significant damage from earthquakes. That's great news from a bridge management perspective. From a writing a manual perspective, that really stinks. We had to pull information from every other manual on the planet to come up with some photographs, so we did that. And you see examples here of the approaches. We not only put the picture, but we also talk about what type of action we would take if we found that particular damage, including things like closure, closing lanes, calling in a stage 2 inspection. Here's some bridge deck movement, examples of other utilities and lights that might be damaged on the structure. Beam ends and bearings, it turns out, are very susceptible to damage. Here's some more significant damage. Fortunate we haven't seen anything like this. But we wanted our inspectors to know if they did see this, they got a problem. In fact, this photograph here on the bottom, we tell the guys during the training, if you see this condition and you don't close the bridge, you might ought to think about a different profession, okay? Because maybe you ought to relook at that. Same thing on some of these. There's also geotechnical conditions that are highlighted in the book, things like soil liquefaction, sand boils, things that could be indicative of a problem but not necessarily warrant closure. Okay, so after that, then we focused our efforts on the response plan. This is a management level tool, also available if you're interested in seeing it. It's downloadable. We've got here some very good guidance to the management team on how they're going to manage the response. Different stages of inspection, the qualifications of personnel, training that's required, earthquake fundamentals, how to properly shore a bridge if you want to restore service to it, etc. Okay, so with that, we wanted to provide training, Stage 1 training and Stage 2 training for our inspectors. Stage 1 training, we actually provided about 12 different modules or lessons around the state, 3.5-hour sessions at all the different field divisions. We always encourage the guys to be really safe out there, and I kind of joke about that, but it actually is a good idea to kind of not both go under the bridge necessarily at the same time if things are a little bit unstable. So a lot of good stuff here in the training. Don't have time to go through all of it, but I will say that the training was very successful, not only from an earthquake response perspective, but also that it would help the inspectors, the maintenance personnel, to understand a little better bridge fundamentals. So here's some of the training. We trained up 400 personnel throughout the state, including ODOT personnel, local government partners, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Oklahoma Turnpike Authority, and these are the different divisions in the state of Oklahoma, the ODOT divisions that we provided training in. Stage 2 training was provided during ODOT's annual QA. We trained up about 200 certified bridge inspectors on what to look for for post-earthquake inspections. That was also very successful.
Gregg trained over 400 people. I think he trained somebody in all 77 counties. That was just a tremendous task, and we really appreciate his help in this effort. So we wanted to look at 3 different bridges a little bit closer, 3 bridges along I-35. We wanted to kind of check our fragility curves, our trigger level, 5.6%, were these realistic? So we took a bridge on the South Canadian Bridge, more recent construction, drilled shafts, series of 100-foot spans, do a little bit of geotech, get the professors at OU to do some finite element studies, really dig into this thing. Another older bridge on I-35 at the Cimarron River, skewed, older design, widened, kind of a challenge. We're going to get lateral spreading. We had concerns. And then we did a grade separation. Well, you think, why a grade separation? Well, how about that column? It's short, it's stiff. How's it going to behave in an earthquake when we're not really designing for earthquake? So this is a concern to us. We did our investigation, and there was pretty good news. They validated our trigger value. They found the potential for liquefaction, maybe some of the lateral spreading issues, wasn't really all that high. We found, to me, somewhat surprising, that the bearings may have been kind of a weak point in our design. The Professor Harvey describes the concerns there. He said transverse loading was more critical. And this did cost us a little bit of expense, but when you think about it, we're going to show you that we're saving a lot of money because we're having to do a lot less inspections while still ensuring the safety of our bridges. And this was really a multi-person, a multi-team effort. We couldn't have done it without our service of infrastructure, without their partners, their subs at OU, and Kleinfelder with our geotech helped us with some very, very thorough investigation. We had the Oklahoma Geological Survey involved, and our partners with the FHWA, Randy, he's always a great resource. So we're recently adopted ShapeCast. Now this allows us to take those shape maps. It allows us to take our fragility curves, right? We know the lat and long on our bridges, right? We got that in the NBI data. So we could take all these factors together, and we can start developing lists of bridges that might be impacted by a seismic event. And then the professors at OU have worked up a system to where they can send out notices to our field people, to our central office, and we can get the information where we need to get it very quickly, and they can develop lists, move it into an Excel spreadsheet, and they have routes to inspect, starting with the most critical bridge. We can all do this with ShakeCast, and we've tailored it to Oklahoma, the way we do MBI numbers, the way we do bridge, the crossing that we have, the facility carried, the field division. We've got it all tailored to the way we're used to doing things. Let's just kind of go back in time. 2011, we had a 5.6 seismic event in Prague, Oklahoma. There was damage locally to some of the buildings, but no damage was found on bridges. But we had to inspect 772 bridges. Had we had ShakeCast back in 2011, we would have only had to inspect 32 bridges, and we would accomplish the same thing. Similarly, the even bigger seismic event that occurred just a little over 1 year ago in Pawnee, Oklahoma, we would have gone out 50 miles with the old protocol that Paul Green, our director of operations, wrote that memo I told you about earlier. We would have inspected 366 bridges. Now with ShakeCast, we're down to about 10% of that value, just 38 bridges.
During a really serious event, like let's just say hypothetically you got a 7 or something, and you started to see widespread damage, do the standards change for what you keep open if everything starts to close and you need to maintain access? I mean, maybe someone like California has more on that or something, but I'm just curious if that was something that you guys looked at. A really nasty event, how do you deal with that?
Okay, so assuming we have a essentially catastrophic event, because a 7.0 in Oklahoma would be catastrophic, we'd be inspecting every bridge in the state, for one. We'd probably be calling on every single resource that we have to do inspections. To be perfectly honest with you, I mean, our response plan would be useful, but it would be adapted on the fly in that event, because it's really, I would argue that we're not really anticipating a 7.0, something in the neighborhood of a 6.0 possibly, and that's still a significant event. We're planning for that level event. To answer your question, will we lower the standard on what we can keep open? I think we'd get creative. I think we might look at shifting lanes, keeping parts of bridges open. We'd have to really get creative to keep people moving, recognizing that it's not just about people getting around, but emergency personnel getting around, et cetera. So, and as you guys know, when the event that you don't anticipate happens, it doesn't matter how much planning you've done. Kind of all bets are off, and you gotta adapt on the fly. I guess that's my answer.
My thoughts go to the previous presentation on the flood and the emergency management that they did on that one. I mean, you can't really change the rules just because you had a very catastrophic event. You might, as Gregg says, get creative and try to keep what you can open, maybe just single lanes. I mean, the vehicle impact that we all experience, always 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, it's kind of the same thing. You get some pretty severe impacts, and do you close the bridge? Do you block a lane? It's just, we got a process in place where we can get our maintenance worker out there quickly and determine if the bridge is still standing or if it needs to be closed or somewhere in between.
The preceding video was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found at tsp2.org. That's tsp2.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.